Long Island, New York. A shadow cast upon the community for years, held captive. Gilgo. LISK. And then his name became Rex Heuermann. And the world changed overnight. What's inside this oddly shaped house? Is there more hidden inside? His arrest shocked the world. His stature looming over the havoc wrought for years. Whose lives did he take? How many more have been changed? And now, new probable cause. A new warrant. Heuermann. Join me for a closer look at the Gilgo case, an inside perspective. Are there more secrets inside? I'm Jennifer Coffindaffer. Welcome to Break the Case.
Lisa, again, I just really want to welcome you. So excited to have you on the show. Somebody who has been involved in the LISK investigation for so long and really has been digging with your investigative skills. So I'm going to let you kick this off. Tell us when you got started on this particular case, why you were drawn to it, and kind of where we're at right now.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. My background is actually as a licensed private investigator. The reason why I got involved in this case is because I live on Long Island. And approximately 25 minutes from the crime scene, and by crime scene, I mean Gilgo Beach itself. And when something like this goes on in the media in your hometown or in your home area, you just can't look away. And so kind of having my background plus the geographic desirability, if you want to call it that, is what got me to go ahead and follow the case and start the deep dive into the police corruption that was taking place previously, in addition to the actual case, what was going on at the time, and any future developments that were taking place.
So, Lisa, for me, I grew up in Kansas, and I grew up about 5 miles from BTK, Bind, Torture, and Kill, and was in that area the entire time that he was murdering, young women, amongst other people. And so I know what you mean in terms of feeling it more from a standpoint of a citizen. And then now, though, you as an adult being able to take that interest and probable concern into using your investigative skills to kind of dig deep into this. Tell me, as a citizen, were you scared? I mean, as these bodies are turning up, tell me what the environment was like as a citizen.
As a citizen, especially a female citizen, when this was taking place, I was in my 20s. And I was always worried about dating at the time because I never knew, could this person that I'm meeting be the Long Island serial killer? And I was always feeding out, and when finding out more about these people that I were going out with, where do you live? What do you do? And just talk about their opinion as to almost like the case at the same time, because it's something that you even walk into a bar and everyone's like, what happened? What's going on? especially with developments going on with victims' remains being found, it's just something that you can't not talk about. So, with regards to the concept of how does everyone feel, women in general were concerned because they never knew if there was going to be an ambush attack. Women that were joining running clubs, going through parks, going and hiking, you have to almost take this into account and not let it affect your daily life pertaining to what you want to go ahead and do. But at the same time, you need to have preventative measures. And not many women are walking around with firearms, walking around with mace, walking around with self defense techniques and capabilities to protect themselves.
Yeah, that's so true, and I think you're right. It comes down to awareness, but then on top of that, it comes down to arming yourself as a woman, particularly when you're alone, to be able to combat somebody who wants to try to take you and try to victimize you. As you know, there's no police officer, there's no FBI agent, nobody's going to come to your rescue in the seconds that it takes to apprehend somebody and to victimize them. So,
Yeah.
it's a scary feeling. As an investigator, what was the first case, the particular case in terms of somebody who was discovered or went missing in this case that just grabbed a hold of you?
For me, it was Shannon Gilbert. The reason why it was Shannon is because of the narrative that was coming out of where she was located, as well as the narrative of what her activities were of the night. A lot of things were not making sense to me. And my concern, due to the fact of known political corruption pertaining to the government in Suffolk County, as well as law enforcement, the rendering of the opinion of how she was deceased or and where she was located later on, a lot of things didn't add up to me.
So, specifically, your biggest concern is where and when she was found. The other details regarding what happened in terms of the reporting is not the biggest issue. It's the biggest issue of where her body was found.
Well, my concerns are on the basis of the location of how exactly did she end up where she was. And so it comes down to the main thing of geography of where she was located in relation to weather conditions, in relation to the highway, and where this has taken place on Ocean Parkway at the time of night, there wouldn't be anyone that would have seen her. So there is the possibility that because if there's no cars on the highway with access point to go ahead and walk onto the beach or get into the marsh, it's a pretty big distance. So for me, there's just been a lot of questions as to necessarily the Suffolk County investigation, but I think that it's one of these situations that with a new fresh set of eyes, it should be taken a look into.
Well, and I want to digress just for a second back to something you touched on from the very beginning, and that was the corruption that existed in Suffolk County at the time, that, of course, has really come out. Take us into the details, not regarding the new task force that has done such an amazing job, in my opinion, of re-looking at the details regarding the Gilgo 4 and continue to look. But let's talk originally. How in the world was were all of these cases brushed under the carpet? And tell us about what you know of the prior investigator involved.
So that charming gentleman, and I'm going to call him that because we're recording and this is going to go everywhere, and I'm just going to be a little facetious. He had his own underlining situation, and by situation, I mean whoever he was involved with. And Burke needed to go ahead and protect himself. And so at that point, I think a lot of these investigations became a quid pro quo in terms of he had his illegal, nefarious activities going on. Other people were aware of it. And I think at that point, one hand washed one and both hands washed the face. And that's why a lot of these cases were not being looked forward to thoroughly because they were afraid that their own negative, nefarious activities were going to be coming forward.
And so let's go ahead and just, for those who know nothing about the LISK case, know nothing about the Gilgo, which is the four that are part of the LISK case. Go ahead and line out for us by names who originally was investigating and how many years went by and what they were then charged with in the middle of kind of all of this mess.
Now, who specifically are you referencing?
I'm talking about Burke.
Okay, yeah. So Burke was involved because he was overseeing the Suffolk County Police Department in the investigation. And at that point, he was conducting nefarious activities. He was involved with sex workers, he was involved with soliciting, he was involved with inappropriate actions with regards to his behaviors within the department. He had also acquired his own criminal history during the course of the investigation by getting involved with the gentleman, and then there was a physical assault that was involved. And even as of a couple of months ago, he was rearrested for soliciting a sex worker in a public park. So we see a continuous behavior pattern of him eliciting and soliciting sex workers and prostitution in public places versus behind doors. And John Ray has actually had women come forward and acquired affidavits of citing him at certain parties pertaining to drug, alcohol, and sex workers.
And so when you talk about John Ray, for people who don't know, that is a lawyer for several of these victims.
Yes, John is representing the families of some of the victims, and he has been such a powerful force with regard to creating a safe space for potential victims of Mr. Heuermann, as well as other individuals, to come forward and tell their narrative, to which he's acquired affidavits citing the behaviors that they've observed. And John Ray has been working with the Suffolk County Police Department to go ahead and assist in their investigation with the information that he's ascertaining.
So, how many years was Burke in charge of the Suffolk County Police Department overseeing these crimes?
Too many. That's the best. I don't have that number specifically right now in front of me, but it was a specific length of time during these bodies were found and the remains, as well as other women were coming forward of possible affiliation to the LISK case. But obviously, they were able to, because they were living victims. Those are just considered open case investigations right now.
With Burke, there were others though that were complicit and had to be complicit for all of these investigations to just really get swept under the carpet. Can you enlighten the audience regarding that?
I think it goes back to what I mentioned before about the quid pro quo situation, where in any agency, and as you know, you don't want to piss off your supervisor. You don't want to go ahead and get reassigned somewhere else. You don't want to go ahead and maybe have a different path of your career because you're not falling in line with what this brass wants you to do. So I think that it became a lot of complicit, negative, learned behavior due to the fact that they were afraid of any retribution.
And let's fast forward past what I'm just going to call the reign of corruption. You know, I I use that word very seldom because so often in cases incompetence mirrors corruption, and people want to say because police officers who have very little training, who typically raise their hand right out of high school, so you have 18-year-olds out there that are conducting investigations and first responders on the scene, and then sometimes collecting evidence, and they're not corrupt. They are incompetent many times. And unfortunately, though, what you end up with is the same result, and that is not effective investigation and corrupted evidence and things of that nature. But this was not that. This was seemingly truly on purpose, overlooking investigations, shoving information under the carpet. But thankfully, Suffolk County had a realignment in terms of prosecution and in terms of investigation with their police department. Can you talk a little bit about that? When did that happen and what did that look like?
So, with regards to Burke, he did not allow the FBI any involvement whatsoever in any of these cases. And my opinion is the fact that he did not want his own dirty laundry coming up, because then you have the feds looking into a state case and the feds can make a case against him. The real turning stone of identifying Rex Heuermann, and again, I think the key word that a lot of people forget is that he's the alleged serial killer. He has not been convicted yet, but it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, it's a duck. Rodney Harrison had come into the fold, and he had left the NYPD and he became the Suffolk County Police Commissioner. And he had brought over Anthony Carter, who was the Assistant Deputy Commissioner as well. And their experience together of working with the NYPD and in their roles, both of them coming over together, the leadership had a bond. The leadership had the leadership experience, and the leadership had the experience of working together where they didn't necessarily have to work with someone new. And that allowed them to go ahead and effectively start with a new task force, bring in new people, and show the cohesiveness and the seriousness of this has to get solved. And that was one of the first things that Rodney Harrison said, and that was one of his goals, and he accomplished it.
Yeah, I think he did an amazing job putting this task force together. I was I just have to say it, um, taken aback when he left. And I read a lot of reports pertaining to that, that were not uh, in a very good light of him. I've seen multiple reasons, but it actually made no sense. And what made sense to me was probably these allegations. Now, it had nothing to do with any involvement with sex traffickers or doing anything wrong from that point of view, but it did have to do with kind of what happens sometimes, and that's banging the books, particularly at the local level, because they're paid, their pay structure. And so that was just so disappointing, but it does not take away from the group of people that he put together and the emphasis he put on solving this case. And I was very concerned, or some of these cases, I was very concerned that when he left, we would see a big slowdown in cases being resolved. But I was happy to see the final Gilgo 4 suspect actually, charges regarding that case. And and then also, of course, what happened most recently. But sticking with our sort of timeline here, take us to the big break and the big news of the arrest of Rex Heuermann.
So the arrest, I will tell you, surprised the hell out of me. It's one of those situations where you wake up in the morning and you pick up your phone and you got all your news alerts and everything. And my only news alert that day was Long Island serial killer, alleged suspect has been arrested. And I go, holy crap. And it's for me one of those situations where it's like, where were you when this happened? I remember where I was, and that's what I'm going to be able to relate to it. And the arrest had taken place here on Long Island. It was more so of, oh my God, and everyone putting together, thinking, did I ever interact with him? Did I ever see him? The neighbors are wondering, how could this man be living next door to me? How could my kids go trick or treating at this house? What exactly is taking place? And then you have the other perspective of, okay, he's been arrested, but there are so many victims. How many of the he responsible for? And are there more actually going on from previous years that we're not aware of? Because Long Island, I hate to say, is known for having multiple serial killers. And I think it comes down again to geographic isolation, of the fact that we are an island and that we are limited, but there is so much land and so much public park space. And that's why it's one of those desirable areas for serial killers.
Well, it was huge news. I think so many thought that no one would ever be arrested. And as you said, Rex Heuermann stands accused, not convicted. But there has been some overwhelming evidence presented in the public light regarding his involvement. And certainly his stature sticks out so much, which I know has helped other women say, oh my gosh, I interfaced with him and this happened, other people coming forward. Um, what was your thought when you saw him?
Holy crap. You can't miss him. I mean, there's one guy that I saw on social media, I think it might have been Reddit, that took a picture of Rex years ago when he was sitting on the Long Island Railroad. And he was just on the train commuting back and forth, and he was just commenting, like, holy crap, this guy's huge. And then all of these years later, he went back into his photos and he goes, this guy was sitting on the train across from me, and I took a picture of him so many years ago. And when that picture was taken, that was at the time where some of the girls were missing.
When I saw him, when you look at him next to agents and officers arresting him and see, I know some of those agents are 6 foot tall, 6'1", and he
Yep.
dwarfs everyone. What hit me, I guess, was these women, the helplessness they would feel. I mean,
Yep.
just the sheer size and girth, weight of this man on top of you, taking control physically of you in a sexual and in a physical, murderous manner, just had to be unbelievable in terms of what that must have felt like in terms of helplessness. Can you take us through? I want to go through each of the 4 Gilgo victims, sort of their circumstances, just very briefly, and what the number one piece of evidence you feel exists regarding each of those.
Yeah. So for me, the most damning piece of evidence are the strands of hair. You can't refute DNA. And we can talk about how when the search warrants were executed the first time the house was turned upside down, we're taking physical, tangible objects out of the house to maybe go ahead and develop a profile on him and kind of do the whole no stone turned unturned. But you're dealing with now 400 and something devices. You're dealing with clothing, you're dealing with memorabilia pertaining to the family and childhood histories and stuff like that. But you can't refute DNA. The DNA was found on the burlap. You have the belt. And all of these things are going to go ahead and put together that are scientifically based versus going back to what you had mentioned, an investigator's opinion. And going ahead and trying to piece the puzzle together on the basis of their opinion and what their thoughts are. And it goes back to, again, effective versus ineffective investigative training. Just because you have an idea and just because you think that this is what it is, you can't force the puzzle piece into the puzzle. And that's why I prefer the scientific community of using DNA, because you can't refute that.
No, I agree. And the whole issue is it irrefutably connects him, irrefutably connects. Now, they can try to come up with some explanations, and I'm sure we're going to see that if this does go to trial, in terms of, well, whoever the killer was had burlap that at one time Rex Heuermann was looking at for, another purpose, and his hair got on that, and he also transferred the hair of his wife, because we know Asa Ellerup's hair is also in some of the evidence. But the bottom line is, when you look at a case like this, I think a jury usually is not bamboozled, and they can see the probability of that being anywhere in the realm of making sense doesn't exist.
Yeah, I think the DA is doing an incredible job and taking his time, because we've both seen in our careers where DAs or sometimes even higher up government officials want to make a case, and they'll go ahead and they'll rush that puzzle piece and shove it into the puzzle, whether it fits or it doesn't. And in this case, he's taking such a step by step approach and being so methodical, and he's not rushing it. And that is probably the best thing that is going on pertaining to this investigation, as opposed to a hurry up and wait, because that's when you're going to lose the possibility of investigators contaminating evidence. You're going to go ahead and have inaccurate reports being reflected in written. Bless you. And you're going to also run into the fact of the court of public opinion, because the last thing in a case like this is the general public. Obviously, everyone has their own opinions, but you don't want them to go ahead and influence a jury, because the jury, they don't know if they're going to be sitting on it. You don't know until you actually go to court, you get selected, and then you have to go to a grand jury indictment, or you actually get chosen to serve on the jury. So whatever is being put out into the media has to be accurately reflected because of the court of public opinion.
Well, in this day and age, especially, we're seeing that. And because, everyone has a cell phone, everyone can look everything up. So it's now more than ever, compared to back in the day, so important. But this was a tricky case because the minute they knew they had a possible serial killer on the loose, they had to take steps. So I agree with you that the DA has handled this so well, because it was a tricky balance. Now you have somebody capable of murdering these women in this fashion, and you can't let him out in the public. So they monitored him, put him under surveillance, and the minute he bought that other cell phone, which led them to realize, oh my gosh, this is his pattern. People have set MOs for the crimes they commit. Almost always. There's been a few cases where they're smart enough to change things up, but for the most part, there are set situations, and his related to his use of a cell phone in those contexts. So we have the Gilgo 4 that Rex Heuermann has been charged with now with their murders. And we think sort of everything from, we know that investigators have mounds of evidence to go through. They have mounds of digital and electronic communications to decipher. They have so much evidence. And for someone like me, someone like you, we know what's happening behind the scenes. That's what's happening. And then we get a sort of shot. And that shot was, what in the world is happening at Rex Heuermann's house? So to set the stage, this happened a couple of days ago, and I can't wait for you to get into how you got on scene and how all of that transpired. But essentially, Rex Heuermann's home, for those who don't know, was turned upside down by officials. About 13 days, as I recall, of searches, investigation by evidence response teams that are very well equipped to search such a residence. I mean, the backyard was dug up. It looked like they had done an extremely thorough search, and boxes and boxes, truckloads of evidence was taken out of that home. So for many people said, when his home was searched again yesterday, and by the way, Issa Elrup again wasn't there, but was in South Carolina. She's never around. She's never around for anything.
She's missing all the good stuff.
Yeah. So anyway, they go back in, and they had a search warrant. And for those who don't understand search warrants, once you serve a search warrant, conduct your search however long it takes, when you leave, in the Bureau, we called them FD 597s, which was basically our inventory of what we took in in legal realm, it's the return of the warrant. In terms of the inventory, the inventory of the warrant, you leave that with you. You served it upon, and the minute you lock up and leave that residence, you can't go back without another search warrant. So this was not some sort of extension from the initial probable cause. This was brand new probable cause related to information that either indicia of a crime was there or a body was there, which I guess is also indicia of a crime, but some evidence was still at that location. How did you first get onto this story, the second story, part 2?
Oh, it's the second search warrant. So I woke up to a text message from one of my sources that said Rex's house being raided. See you later. Yeah, and of course I pick up my phone and I see that it was like maybe like 8:15, and I look at my calendar for the day and I go, I've got a polygraph at 9 a.m. for a client. Clearly, I'm going to be showing up late. But the entire time during my polygraph, I'm like tapping my leg, like freaking out. I'm like, I just want to get there already. I'm like, I want to know what's going on. For me, I was always like, I want to see them breach the house. But of course, I missed that. So I arrived on scene around noon, and I was there until around 9:15 at night. And for me, I wasn't like a nosy neighbor. I was there as more of an investigator that's been following the case, that's also working on the Gilgo podcast with investigative discovery. So I wanted to make sure that whatever information that we were going to be giving out to our listeners was going to be the most accurate. And then I happened to have been at the right place in the right time when the ME had shown up. And at that point, none of the media was paying attention. So I was the one that actually got the story and posted the whole thing about the ME showing up. And then after I posted it, I tapped a couple of people on their shoulder. I'm like, fuck. And then they go, oh, we missed it. I was like, yeah, but I didn't. And so we were there for about 9 hours. It was just the New York State Troopers and Suffolk County. We did find out that the Nassau County Medical Examiner was also there, but they were there because the house is based in Nassau County. Nassau is a part of the task force, but due to the fact that it is an ongoing Suffolk County case, Nassau County would probably have jurisdiction and then be able to transfer everything over to Suffolk County.
Right. I mean, that's the beauty of task forces, because it actually enables everyone, even out of jurisdiction, which is, as an FBI agent, everything's in your jurisdiction, so to speak. But when you're talking about Suffolk and Nassau County and other counties, people play in their own backyards. You're not allowed to really go out of your backyard unless invited by the other person. But a task force really helps combine everybody's resources. And that's one of the best things that was done in this case. And so for me, when I found out on Twitter, as I was doing my morning scrub, what was happening, and the big thing that for me just hit hard was the ME. I saw that photo based on your coverage, and I thought, MEs just don't get called out. People can argue this, but I'm telling you, you don't call them out unless there's a belief of human remains. It's just that's what an ME typically is called out for. Now, I was wondering myself about a forensic pathologist, because that's also a possibility. What were you hearing about the ME, and was there ever a forensic pathologist called out?
I don't have direct knowledge of a forensic pathologist or a forensic anthropologist being on site. Bear in mind, they could have just shown up in their personal vehicle, walked onto the scene, and been underneath one of those tents, and could have been there the whole time and no one would have seen them. So we don't actually have confirmation that they were not there. But I think the most important thing is going back to the idea that they executed a search warrant on the basis of probable cause. What that probable cause is, no one has any idea. But it could be from the fact that they did a dig in Manorville last week, or they're finally also still going through those 400 something cell phone and electronic devices, and maybe they found something.
I agree. It could even be something just like a blueprint. I mean, let us not forget Rex Heuermann was an architect.
Yeah.
Imagine the possibilities in terms of secret compartments, secret areas in that house that if you don't tear it apart board by board, you're not going to see. Um, I know in one of the cases I had, one of the most, hopefully they searched here because I searched these from then on. All the indicia of the crime I was looking for was in a rain gutter. Now,
Oh,
yeah, up on the roof in plastic bags that were all along a rain gutter. This was a terrorism case. And
okay.
I would have, I never have in my past. And only after that happened, which was probably about 10 or 12 years into my career, then in the future, I always said, sorry, guys, we're getting up on the roof. We're looking in the rain gutters. Um, so, did they look everywhere? And also, I've been in houses where literally staircases moved. It didn't look like they moved, but they did and came open, and there were hideaways. So it could be something as interesting as that, is them seeing some sort of architectural draw up and said, oh my gosh, we missed the fact that if we hit this board and do this, this opens. So I've thought about that a lot as a possibility.
Yeah, that's one of the main things. And I actually tweeted from the field thinking that he's an architect. Anything is possible. I mean, certain serial killers emulate other serial killers. BTK had hidey holes. So there could be something that relates where he was doing these online searches pertaining to Gilgo and killers and serial killers. And these are all things that we've come across through the discovery and the bail application of what he was looking for. Maybe he found that as an interest and he used his architectural skills to go ahead and create his own. The first thing I was thinking, standing across the street from the house, I'm like, this house could be like the Goonies, where you push a keyboard and like something pops out of the wall, because he has the capability to go ahead and do things like that. And if you're going to do certain things to the internal part of your house, you don't need to file a permit for it. But if I was one of the investigators at the scene, I would have picked up every floorboard and I would have knocked that place down to the studs, knowing that he's an architect, because there could be anything behind the wall.
And we know, at least we believe that wasn't done. I mean, based on the exit pictures, that wasn't done. And remember, on BTK, Dennis Rader, his years later, decades later, they just went back decades later and removed a shed, and underneath that shed, and found the pantyhose and other items.
There were other trinkets that haven't been discoverable. I mean, I'm aware of that investigation, as well as other items being found in different locations, because at one point we had the cold case task force that was focusing on Dennis, but there were items found underneath. But
trying to just mind my words with regards to an NDA in mind. There's the hidden items that were under the shed, but it also has to be remembered that sometimes when a search warrant is executed, that shed may not have been included in that search warrant. It's almost like having an attached garage or a detached garage on a property. If the warrant is only good for the house, sometimes you can't go ahead and hit the actual other garage because it could be zoned for a different residential address, where if you have like a double lot or a single lot.
Wow. Well, I've never been a part of anything like that, because you include the chickens, the kitchen sink. Well, obviously, but I mean, you make sure to reach out to the furthest extents of curtilage. But I guess what you're saying, if it was a possible double lot, that is how it could have been missed, if they only were allowed to search within a certain lot line. But that's just a mistake by the original investigators. That's all that is, because you have to include any place that could have been accessed by that individual in their, ability to look into that. Store. I'm talking about storage on a lot.
Yeah.
That would normally be included, but nevertheless, our point certainly is the same, Lisa, right? That a lot was missed in BTK, found decades later. And in this situation, things could have been missed. And we also have to keep in mind, it is possible he cooperated. That would be quite a bombshell. I'm just saying it's a possibility. Somebody else cooperated that knew something that finally came forward. Asa, the children, something, some nugget in some way. And then obviously the writings, beyond like a blueprint to me, are the writings, right? If he kept any sort of diary or was, which I think that would be this kind of guy. I think he would relish in rereading and looking at what happened on those days. And so I think it could be something like that as well.
I agree with you because of what we previously know about the credit card statements that were made public that tied him to one of the victims. And I've stuck with my own opinion that he had 2 storage units that were loaded with papers, loaded with physical devices. And I think that he's the type of person that would either go back to the storage unit and relive it by going through the documentations, maybe replugging in a computer or turning on a cell phone, because he had so many cell phones. If you're going to use a burner phone, and as you know, you're going to kill the burner phone. It's like a flip phone. You're going to break it in half. You're going to throw it out. It's a one-time use only type of thing. But he has so many phones over the course of a period of time. Maybe there were pictures on these devices. Maybe there were videos. Maybe there were text messages, anything at all. But he just couldn't get away with throwing it out.
I'll be interested to see whether he really fights this. I just think the amount of evidence related, at least to the Gilgo 4, is going to be overwhelming and perhaps tied into other cases, other people who lost their lives due to LISK. We say it so generally when it could be more than one person. But in any event, or whether he will be like a Dennis Rader and say, listen, I want to tell the story. I need to be the one that has everybody, the world, investigators, everyone listening to me as I relish in the details. I see him more like that for some reason. Rex Heuermann like that. I could be completely off base, but I just see him like that. I've got a question for you. Do you think he will be tied to other LISK victims?
I can only speak to my own opinion of being that there is so much discovery and there is so much being found out on the investigative side that I don't want to go ahead and say that he's responsible for X, Y, and Z. I think that once the scientific proof comes out, then it's up for me to read that information and then form my own opinion. Because there's also the situation of being in Manorville with another convicted killer that could possibly be tied to Rex, and he filed a 440 motion to vacate the conviction due to certain DNA not being in the system at the time at his arrest and his trial. So there's speculation that maybe now that Rex's DNA is in some sort of system, but not in New York because he has not been convicted, as the New York state law is the fact that his DNA does not go into the system until he is convicted. I think in terms of if he is found guilty and he is convicted and his DNA goes into the system, obviously there's a possibility that on the basis of cold case information that are in these databases pertaining to DNA samples that didn't have a match before, there could be a possibility that his is a match, but I'm not saying that he's responsible for anything. But there's always a possibility. It is a 50-50 chance.
Yeah, that is a quirkiness about New York state law that is very different from most other states. Most other states, you arrest somebody, you swab them up, and it goes into the database. Most other states. New York is not like that. They have to be convicted before they're in the database. And sadly, it honestly completely detracts from the whole purpose of the database. You're trying to get known, or at least possible killers, off the streets before they kill again. That's the whole reason for the database, is to get a hit and say, oh my gosh, we're connecting them to this murder. This is who we've got. It's not just a theft or something else that they've been arrested for. This is major. And so it completely detracts from that. But I'm glad you brought it up. It's very unusual. And once Rex's DNA goes into the system, and who knows what cases will be. But back to, I guess, a more pointed question regarding other LISK victims. Do you see any particular nuances of those situations that you think could align with at least possibly being Rex, or no, not from what you've seen? No big beacon.
I'm not able to go ahead and form the opinion to say, I think he's tied to this because of this. There are different victims that are not the Gilgo 4 that are affiliated with the possibility of being tied to the Long Island serial killer. But the way that the bodies are being found and the way that they're being preserved, like Peaches was found in a Tupperware in the bin. So, by being put into Tupperware, there's obviously a preservation of the remains, in addition to even bugs and flies, where you can go ahead and study the bug and figure out how long they've been in there and kind of do a timeline. So there are different things that are taking place amongst other victims that are not necessarily tied to this, but we could have another serial killer on our hands that are responsible for certain bodies. Just going back to the DNA thing, if Rex is convicted and his DNA does go into the system, it has the opportunity for other agencies throughout the country to sample his DNA to determine if he's tied to other cases out of state, because we do know that he has an extensive travel history. What I personally am a very big fan of is the new piece of legislation in Florida, where Governor DeSantis is having a team go into prisons and swabbing all the inmates, just trying to close cold cases. And I think that in terms of being able to afford justice and sorry, I almost said the word closure, and I hate using the word closure because there's no such thing as closure when you're dealing with a cold case investigation and a victim. It's almost bingo. You're giving the family members the answers that they rightfully deserve. So I feel like, let's say if New York took this on, we can then go ahead and determine, is A, Rex responsible for any of these other victims? And B, are any of these victims tied to someone that's currently incarcerated?
I want to comment quickly about what you just mentioned with DeSantis. No matter what your political thoughts are, he is brilliant in terms of trying to innovate crime legislation, I'll just call it. I mean, he's the first one to get legislated that if you rape a child, you can be put to death. Now, that's nowhere else. It's only with him. It goes against the federal law, because it's really a life has to be lost, not just a rape, so to speak. But anyway, it's brilliant. And I know a lot of people that will say, oh my gosh, Jennifer, how can you say that? The rights of these people getting swabbed. What about the rights of the family? What about the rights of the victim? What about the murdered soul? So for me, this is just a no-brainer. Public safety, thank you. This is a no-brainer.
Yeah, it's absolutely no-brainer, because he's not necessarily going ahead and testing people on death row. You're testing people that are still eligible for parole. We don't know what their behaviors and their conducts are. We don't know if there's going to be time taken off their sentence because they've been behaving in bars versus out of bars. And you're then running the risk of putting this person on the street and thinking, oh, I already served time for this case, but I never got caught for this.
That's another huge point, is public safety. And it's even death row people, to me, should be swabbed, because they could be responsible for so many more crimes. Ted Bundy, he was only held accountable for so few murders, but it's believed that he committed so many more murders. And likely, we'll never know. I don't know if they've done any research on that, taking his DNA, exhuming him, and comparing. But in any event, I just love the points that you make regarding DNA being the true litmus test, if you will, in these types of cases where you have strangers that are connected through DNA that lead you to that were found on a murder victim's body. Last question for you, regarding LISK, the LISK killer. Do you have confidence that this task force will be able to solve the rest of these LISK unsolved murders?
So all of the murders, I don't want to refer to them as lists. I want to refer to them as their individual cases, because the MO, again, and the way that some of these victims were found don't necessarily match the MO of the Gilgo 4. There is a progression of violence as well as more extensive abuse to the victims. And so you have to think, if there is one killer, did they go through trauma, or did something happen to them which has escalated their mode of how they chose to effectively take the rights and lives of other individuals? Or is there someone else that went ahead and did what they did, thinking that they were going to blame it on the other individual that was responsible for the Gilgo 4? So this does have to be taken, so a case-by-case approach, because each victim is a victim. Just because this person is a victim of this doesn't mean this one is a victim of that. And so I do have confidence in the task force. I absolutely do. I haven't seen the police chief come out and say anything, and he just came into office not too long ago. So I think he's trying to err on the side of caution and not ruffle any feathers and just let them do what they have been doing, because they were effective with Rodney and they're continuing to be effective right now.
This type of a case, I know that they've got their hands full, right, with all this evidence that they've already extracted. And then now they still are dealing with all the other cases that are on their plate that remain unsolved. It's a big, big ask. And, I just hope and I know they will keep on it. And hopefully there'll be more answers.
Yep.
Lisa, thank you so much. You have been great.
Of course.
Great. I really enjoyed the discussion, and hopefully we bring a little bit more light to this case that hasn't been talked about a lot until recently. So thank you, Lisa. Keep up the great work.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
All right. We'll see you. Thank you so much for listening to this segment of Break the Case. If you liked what you saw, I hope you will subscribe and like. And till the next time, may justice be served.